Welcome to Monterey Public Library's first California History Room webinar, Searching Your Roots at the Library. My name is Inga Waite, and it's my great fortune to be the library director here. Our guest speaker will be answering questions at the end of the presentation. Please type questions in the Q&A panel of your screen as they occur to you. Our guest speaker tonight is Kathy Nielsen. Kathy Nielsen is a reference librarian in the California History Room at the Monterey Public Library. She earned a BA in History at the University of California, Berkeley, and an MA in History at Hunter College City University of New York. After teaching history in high school and middle school, she returned to UC Berkeley and obtained a master's degree in library science. Kathy is a popular genealogy speaker on the Monterey Peninsula. She has shared her adventures with the Monterey Public Library, the Carmel Valley Library, the Monterey County Genealogy Society, Monterey Peninsula College's GenTrain program, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, CSUMB, and DAR Ancestry Roundup. Kathy combines her skills as a historian, a storyteller, and a librarian with her love for travel and her search for her family's history. It is my pleasure to introduce Kathy Nielsen.
Inga, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here tonight and to share with you all two of my passions. One is family history and the other are libraries. And so today I'm going to give you some tips on how to search for your family and your roots at the library. This is a picture of my great aunt Tot. She's the second one on the right. She was a school teacher. And every year she would give me at my birthday the perfect appropriate book. And as a result, I think she's the one that had a big impact on me becoming a librarian and loving to read. All of our ancestors have stories, and it's our responsibility to share those stories with those that we love. My story starts with the boxes in the garage. When my parents passed on, I inherited the various things that they had left regarding our family. And about a year after they passed on, I opened one of the boxes, and there, on the top of the box, was this wonderful article about my Green family. It was written for a genealogy magazine, and it was written by a cousin whom I did not know. But I sat down to read it, and I couldn't believe the story, their revolutionary story, their contacts, their migration west, and I just became enchanted by their story. They say that you go looking for your ancestors, and your ancestors find you, and I think that's exactly what happened. My ancestors found me, and I was bitten by the bug. So why genealogy? What is there about genealogy that has just bitten so many of us? There's some practical reasons. One is that you're seeking answers to family questions, and you hope to validate the family stories that you've heard. Maybe you hope to trace medical conditions. Maybe there's something that's developed, and you'd like to know if that's something that's in the family. And maybe you'd like to find your birth parents if you're an adoptee. And maybe there's a question of paternity in your family, and you'd like to find proof of it. You'd like to answer that question. And then there's land ownership. How did a piece of land come into your family or not come into your family? Do you want to trace a family inheritance? Why did another section of the family get that inheritance and not your section? So maybe there's a question about inheritance. And then maybe you just want to join a lineage society. A lineage society would be like the Mayflower Society or the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution, or the Sons of the Golden West. And that might be something that you want to prove that you are a member. But for me, there were some philosophical aspects that drew me to genealogy, almost spiritual in a way. I love becoming a detective. Maybe that's why I'm a librarian. I'm interested in solving the mysteries and discovering the secrets of a family. And maybe that's something that might appeal to you as well. And I found, and maybe this would appeal to you, that I was very excited about standing on the land or in the house where my ancestors once lived. I could imagine them laughing, loving, crying, and perhaps even dying in that house. And I just found that that really gave me a rush almost. And maybe you're just curious about your ancestors. Knowing about your ancestors helps you develop your own sense of identity. There's a possibility that you feel empowered by the truth and are able to heal the old wounds, the wounds that have been handed down from generation to generation. And by understanding what went into that, you may be able to heal some of those wounds. And you might just want to develop a compassion and understanding. You can understand why your family members lived the life they did. You accept that your ancestors were people just trying to survive and do the best they could with the life they were given. One of the genealogists that I've followed over the years is Lisa Louise Cook. Her company is called Genealogy Gems. She's a podcaster, she's a blogger, and she speaks at conferences all over the world, actually. And in one of her podcasts, she was interviewing a genealogist, and the genealogist said, "I have been a reluctant genealogist most of my life until I realized genealogy's power to unlock family secrets and make sure of the stories Mom told me about my family." And I can really identify with that. We all have stories that have been handed down, and some are true and some maybe not so true. And there's just a desire on my part and many other genealogists to find out if those were indeed true stories. The interesting thing is stories last just 3 generations. We know our own story, we know the story of our parents, and we know perhaps the stories of our grandparents, but we're a little fuzzy on the stories of our great-grandparents. So for those stories to last, they need to be passed on. And it's really a responsibility of each of us to pass on our own stories and the stories that we know of those who have gone before us. This is a picture of my Swedish family. When I was a little girl, we used to meet get together once a year for a big reunion. And in this picture, there are basically 3 generations: myself, my parents, and the great aunts and uncles and grandparents. And each of these people have a story. It's interesting how genealogy has become such a popular hobby, and it's right up there with gardening, which is amazing. This is a picture of me in Ontario along the St. Lawrence. I do have Loyalist ancestors, and I went up and followed the route of my 4th great-grandmother, who was a Loyalist. Her family had to leave upper state New York. Her husband actually was hung in his front yard, and she took her 6 children, stood on the banks of Lake Champlain waiting for a British ship to take her across the lake, and she followed the St. Lawrence to the land in Mallory Town, where she finally settled and had 2 more husbands and more children. All of us have stories like that, and that's what's so exciting about this hobby, genealogy as a hobby. This is what's called a fan chart. And this is my mother's fan chart. I have one for my father as well. My mother has 2 parents, just as we all do, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, 32 great-great-great-grandparents, goes to 64 and 128 and 256 and on and on. And every one of these people have a story. It's amazing. You can see I have a lot of blank spaces there because I haven't researched a lot of these stories. But what I recommend is that you pick one person, one line, and stick with that because it is a little overwhelming. My husband is Australian, and we've done some research into his family as well. And in a trip to Australia, I visited the Mitchell Library. The Mitchell Library in New South Wales is very much like our California State Library in Sacramento. And in the lobby of the Mitchell Library was a quote, "All great stories lead back to us." And I think that's really true. We start with our stories and we move out to those of our parents, our grandparents, and our great-grandparents. And what fun it is to find out the stories of those ancestors that went before us. So what I recommend as you begin this process of searching for your roots is identify the branch that you wish to research. You've all heard stories, and maybe there's one that sort of really intrigued you, or maybe there's a person that you think is a character and has quite a story. Start with that person and identify, if you can, the names of those family members. And if you know the maiden name for the female ancestors, that's even better because that's tricky. Sometimes those maiden names get lost in the process. And if you know dates, that would be the birth, marriage, and death dates. That's very helpful, although you can fill those in over time. But if you know them, that is great. And the third element, as you identify the branches and begin your research, are the locations. And that would be the locations where your family members lived when they were born, when they married, and when they died. So if you have some of this information, you're ready to start. So gather all the information that you have at home first. That's the fun part, actually. Maybe you have photos and movies. And just as an aside, if you do have photos and movies, and slides would be another possibility, think about digitizing them now. VHS tapes that you may have of your children or other members of the family would be something that you would want to digitize because they're starting to disintegrate. Photos are fading and slides are fading. So that's just something to think about. You want to get those together. Letters, that's something else. Diaries, journals, memoirs. You have those, that's very special. A family Bible, and that certainly can give you insights into dates and names. And physical items that tell a story. That might be like a quilt or a family vase, a teapot, dishes. I actually have one plate that survived the San Francisco fire and earthquake, and you can actually see where it was burned. And that's very special. But the most important thing is talk to those older relatives because they have the stories, and you want to actually record them or write down and ask questions. But talk to them now. I wish I'd asked my parents so many more questions. You want to organize your information because that information is going to come in fast and furious. Begin with what you know yourself and work backwards. Sometimes people have very good luck starting with their ancestor and working back to them. But actually, it's best to start with what you know for sure. And as you put this information together, you might compile a family tree. I just want to add that we'll answer questions at the end. So if you can hold your questions, that would be great. In a family tree, you can include the name, the dates of birth, marriage, death, and location, and start to put that together, and then you can see where your gaps are. And I found it very helpful to create a timeline. That would be the birth of your birth, the marriage, and the death. But in that timeline, I also like to put things like the Civil War, World War I, maybe a smallpox epidemic, other things, the Transcontinental Railroad when that was built, because our families made decisions based on things that were happening during their time. The migration west may have been because of the gold rush. It may have been because of something that was happening in their town, maybe because of a crop failure. So if you actually can put it in the context of the time, you might be able to answer some of the questions that you might have, why a family moved on. So make your timeline full and add all those historical notes that you know about. This is a pedigree chart. And this is of my grandfather. He's number 1. My great-grandparents are 2. You can see Daniel Monroe if you can read this. I know it's a little small. But this is just a series of boxes where you have the person and then their parents and then their parents. You can actually sketch this out on a piece of paper. And this might be a good way to start to put your family together. And then what you want to do is build a research plan. And that's really very simple. You set a goal. Maybe you want to see if your ancestors were in the Civil War. Maybe that's what you'd like to prove. It can be as simple as that, or it can be whether or not they lived on a certain street in a certain town. This is a picture of me at the New England Historic Genealogical Society, and I went back to research my Loyalist and my Revolutionary ancestors. This is an amazing library for those of you that have colonial ancestors. Assess what you have, what documents you have, what books you have. Consider new materials to research. What might give you the information that you need in terms of military records, in terms of a census location. And adjust to unexpected conditions. Many documents have been destroyed over time. In fact, in 1973, military documents for World War I and World War II were burned in a fire in St. Louis. So for those looking for documents that have to do with that time period, it is a challenge, but there are other documents that can fill that gap. Oh, and during the Civil War, Southern courthouses were burned, so many Southern documents have been lost. Okay, so what are these documents that you're looking for? What are these records? Well, here they all are. These are the ones that help you with the names, and help you with the location and with the dates. The vital records, of course, are the birth, marriage, and death records. The census helps you track the movement of a family. So in 1850, they may have been on the East Coast. 1860, they may be in the South. 1870, they may move further west. But it gives you an opportunity to see the movement of your family. Court records help you with the land, the deed, the probate, the wills. Marriage records, court records you often actually have to visit the courthouse or to request documents. They're slowly getting digitized, but that's been a slower process. Church records, of course, tell you about baptisms and weddings. Military records can tell you where your ancestors fought. Cemetery records are very interesting. It's not just the tombstones. Cemeteries actually will have like an index file or card file where they list who bought the plot, who organized the funeral, who is paying for the maintenance of that plot. So be sure and ask as you're exploring cemeteries. Some of the larger ones will have these records, and they can be very helpful. They can also help you with surnames. Immigration records, of course, we want to know when our families came to this country. Newspapers are lots of fun. They have social events, church events, the marriages, the visits, and the larger, more significant things in people's lives. And DNA has turned genealogy upside down. This is a whole new opportunity for all of us to validate the research and the written records that we've done, and also may prove or disprove some of the things. Many people have found that the work that they have done has indeed, new light has been shed on it. And then also the local and general history of an area. And that's where you want to go and contact the museums, the libraries, the historical societies in the towns where your ancestors lived. So where are these records? This is again where location plays a very important role. Well, they're online, but you know, only about 25% of all of these records are online, even with all that we're hearing about the records online. Really only about 25%. That's amazing. The other records are in libraries and archives, like here at the Monterey Public Library. They're in museums. They're in the courthouses, as I mentioned earlier. They're in the churches, and churches are very happy to share their records with us. They're in the cemeteries, and they're in the historical and genealogical societies in the towns where your ancestors lived. So sometimes, after we've exhausted all of our online sources, we need to actually visit or at least contact the repositories that may have the documents we need. So the thing to do is to first exhaust all of your online resources. And these would be the big 4 plus 1. And the big 4, you probably know what the first one is. It's Ancestry. Now, membership in the Ancestry online resource subscription can be a little bit pricey. But the good news is it's free at the Monterey Public Library and other local libraries, and probably the libraries in the towns, if those of you who do not live on the Monterey Peninsula, it's probably available there too. So you want to take advantage of that. The Family Search site is also free, and I think that it's every bit as good as Ancestry. It's actually the site that's been put together by the Latter-day Saints. Some of you may know that the Latter-day Saints are very interested in searching for their ancestors and then in baptizing them. And the work that they do, because of this belief, is so helpful to those of us that are not members of this faith. And they have made this all free and available to us. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this site. Find My Past is a site that focuses on the British Isles and Australia and Canada and the other colonies that the British had. It's a very good site for those who have Scottish, English, and Irish ancestors. It also does cost, but it is free at the Family History Center, which in most cases are located near the Latter-day Saints Church. Our Family History Center is on Plumas and Buena Noche in Seaside. My Heritage is also a subscription, but it is also free at the Family History Center. My Heritage is a very up-and-coming, very big online subscription service. It's an Israeli company that actually serves a larger international population. So if you are looking to connect with ancestors in Europe, this is an excellent site to subscribe to. It also is involved in DNA, so that like Ancestry, it gives you contact with cousins who have the same DNA and also provides records. Those are the 4 big online sites, and all of them have much to offer. They're a little different. You don't want to just subscribe to one or just look at one, because they all have different records, and so you want to put those all together when you're searching for your family. But there's one little site that's not one of the big 4, It's called Heritage Quest, and it's free through the Monterey Public Library and other libraries. Ancestry you need to use at the library, but Heritage Quest, with your library card, you can remotely access it at home. And it's a very good place to start. It has a lot of the same things that Ancestry does. It's not as large a site, but it is a good place to start. So I recommend that you get a library card, the Monterey Public Library, and you go home and try this one. I mentioned the Monterey Family History Center. This is connected with the LDS Church. It is on at Nucha Buena and Plumas, and it is opened on Tuesday and Wednesday, Friday, and the second Saturday. I recommend you give them a call before going over there just to confirm that it is open. It's run by volunteers with the Monterey Genealogical Society, actually. The Genealogy Society uses this church library as a base. Many of their speakers speak there, and many of the volunteers at the Family History Center are connected to the Genealogy Society. So this is a great place to start your search after, of course, you visited the Monterey Public Library. So what are you looking for as you get into this? Well, you're looking for records that track migration and the growth of families, records that give clues to names, dates, and locations. This is a house in Castroville where my Monterey Peninsula family lived for a short time. They rented this for about a year. It was owned by a member of the Cooper family, and those of you that are Monterey people know the Cooper family played a big role in Monterey. This house is owned by a family. They've definitely kept it up, and it's a beautiful little house in Castroville. So in order to know your ancestor, you need to know when and where your ancestor lived, because all records are connected to a location. So this is an ancestry site. This is my personal site because you can see I have the Monroe family tree there. And this is my Monroe family. This is my Daniel Monroe and Emma Sarah Monroe. And they came to San Francisco in 1868. I can simply put in Daniel Monroe. I know that he was born in 1838 in Canada and that he died in 1914 in San Francisco. I simply put in what I know, and then I'm given some records about Daniel Monroe that can confirm or introduce new information. You can see it introduces his father and his mother. I see a death index and different census records. On the left, I have circled ways I can filter that search. If I only want census information, then I can click that and I'll only get the census information. If I only want military information, I can click that. Just a way of filtering your information. So if in fact I clicked the death filter, I can find something that has to do with obituaries and cemetery. And sure enough, the California Death Index comes up and it confirms that Daniel Monroe did die in 1914. And if you see on the left-hand side, the actual document can be viewed, and that's very handy. And on the right-hand side, this is one thing I really like about Ancestry. You'll see that there are other records that are suggested. So there's more census records, there's a marriage record, there's U.S. directories. Directories are very helpful with tracking a family as well. So that's Ancestry. There are many levels of Ancestry, but that's a good way just to get started. So the Family History Library, the big mother library, is in Salt Lake City. And this is the largest genealogy library in the country, perhaps in the world. And this is the organization that puts out the Family Search site. It's an enormous building. There's about 8 floors, and each floor has a geographic focus. There's a Latin American, there's a Canadian, and there's one floor that's strictly microfilm. You can see that on the upper right. There may be 20 rows of microfilm documents, and there are hundreds of desktop computers. I've had the pleasure of visiting this library several times, and it is indeed an experience. FamilySearch.org is their website. It's free. It allows a record search. There are family trees. There's a catalog that is of all the records that are on this website. There are digitized books, and there's a wiki, sort of on the order of Wikipedia. And this is what the page looks like. This is my Swedish family. I do have the English-Scottish side of my family, and then I have the Swedish side. And the family search has a collaborative tree. It's a tree that everyone adds to. Ancestry has individual trees, and it's a bit chaotic because everyone's put up their tree, and some of them have not really been verified. But this is one of the good things about family search. There is one tree, and everyone is always verifying everything everybody else adds. So you know that it's generally pretty accurate. So one of my cousins put up a tree for the Anderson Sandgrens, and this is a picture of the Sandgrens in my family. Family search is out there actively digitizing documents right and left. Per camera, they can capture 400,000 to 500,000 images per year. They're all over the world doing this. Family search has a potential to send out 6 to 7 camera teams, so that actually, as a result, they could film 3 million archival documents in a year. And this is ongoing. So family search is definitely a site to watch. And if you can't find it this week, be sure and try next week, because that document just might show up on the site. This is what the family search page looks like. I put in my ancestor's name, Nicholas Mosier. He was a colonial in the early 1600s. He was in Rhode Island, and his family later immigrated to Nova Scotia. And I put in to see what family search had about Nicholas Mosier. And immediately his death came up in Tiverton, Newport, Rhode Island, died at the age of 81. And then 2 other records came up about the baptisms of children that he had, which gave me information about his children. If there is a camera icon, you know that it has been digitized and actually can be accessed online. Here's the family tree, Nicholas Mosier. You can see there's 34 sources there. And some of these are the same sources, but here are sources that people have added. And I can click on any of these and explore them and add them to my research. Here's a timeline. Remember, we talked about how important timeline is: birth of children, deaths. And here's actually spouses and parents. These are things that people have been posting on Family Search. This gives you a very good introduction to this family. And because it's one family tree, there's bound to be discussion. Some in this particular one, the marriage date listed is incorrect. Discrepancies found in the record for children of Nicholas Mosier becomes a dialogue that goes on with people who are researching Nicholas Mosier. And I like that. I like the discussion that ensues. And then people will post things that they have. They'll actually scan them and post them and connect them to the family tree. And here's the chronological data of the Mosier family. Very helpful. It's all online. So much of your research can be done at the FamilySearch.org site. And then too, they're constantly digitizing family history books and that can be accessed online. And in this case, they digitized inscriptions from the cemetery of the Presbyterian Church at Westfield in New Jersey. And that's my Revolutionary family. And I have been to that cemetery. And as you know, the writings on tombstones rub off. And so this 1920 book that was published and digitized has information that you can't necessarily see on the tombstones anymore. One of the wonderful things about Family Search is the wiki. These are my Swedish great-grandparents, Anders Petter Andersson and Fredrika Johansdotter. They came to this country in 1880. And I went back to Sweden to try to retrace their steps. But I first went to the wiki on FamilySearch.org to check out the parish where they lived, Finnerudja. And this wiki gave me some information, things to look at about the history of this little town, not very big at all, little parish. Church records, census records, gave me some ideas and some links to pursue this. It also gave me place names, and these are two of the farms where my family lived. This is Långsbratten in Sweden, where my great-grandmother grew up. Hasn't changed very much. I imagine it was a dirt road at that time, but I was able to find it. But the coup de grace of this wiki, or for one, something I'm very grateful for, is that it did list the genealogy societies in the areas where my Swedish family lived. And I wrote to these genealogy societies. They kindly wrote me back and said, when you come, let us know, and we'll take you to those farms, which are very hard to find, actually. And not only that, they located the descendants of the older sister of my great-grandmother. And we had a wonderful opportunity to meet them, to share stories and photos, and even letters they had of my family. My family had written home from Kingsburg. So I'm very grateful for this site, and you might check it out as you plan your travels. This is that little site that I told you about, Heritage Quest. It's online at home. And you can see it has directories, military records, immigration records, the census. This too is one to check out and one you can look at home. So as you're doing your research, don't forget that collateral family, and you're wondering what the collateral family is. That's the aunts, uncles, siblings, and cousins. Make a note of those surnames your family married into. I know this is a little hard to see, but the one on the left is my husband's direct line. The circle in the middle are his great-grandparents. All of those cousins on both sides have pictures and stories. So keep track of those collateral family members. Another tip is to keep track of the cluster research, and those are the friends, associates, and neighbors. They keep popping up on the cemetery, in the school list, in congregations, and on legal documents. And they popped up in respect to Daniel and Emma Sarah. On their marriage certificate were their witnesses, Arthur H. Snow and Maddie Snow. And in fact, when Daniel went to San Francisco, his law firm was Snow, Monroe, and Fifield. Arthur Snow was a friend of his and a classmate at the University of Michigan, and he was also a lawyer. So he too came out to California and established that law firm. And this is another example of a cluster family. These are names of people that lived in Buxton, North Dakota. Enoch Larson was the brother of the second husband of the daughter of my great uncle. Not a real direct line, but these names of pallbearers were all members of the community, and Adolf Soderberg played a role in helping us find the land of my great-grandparents. We saw this house across the road. We were very disoriented trying to find the land of our grandparents, my brother and I, and my husband and my sister-in-law. But there was a sign, a little hard to read, Soderberg Farm, Centennial Farm, still owned by the same family. And because we knew where this was on the map, and because we knew the Soderbergs were neighbors from that newspaper article, we were able to find the land of our great-grandparents. And we stood on that 150 acres, which was granted to this Swedish tenant farmer with the Homestead Act in 1862. So you've exhausted online resources, and now what? You correspond directly with the repositories, the libraries and archives and museums, the cemeteries, the historical and genealogical societies, and maybe you even plan a genealogy road trip. The resources that may not be online are directories and voter registration. We have many of those in our California History Room in the Monterey Public Library, and we have lots of people come and look at those, or even write us about them, and we will scan the pages and send them to them through email. We have newspapers and periodicals, and in fact, our Monterey newspapers are digitized, 1846 to 1959, and you can access this through our website. Obituaries, maps, photos, clipping file, lots of newspaper and photographs, and local secondary sources like mug books, centennial books that were created in honor of a special event in a town. These are not online, so you're going to need to directly contact the libraries and archives. This is the California History Room, which is a little gem on the second floor at the Monterey Public Library. We have a lot of people who are interested in genealogy and have Monterey families who visit us. The upper right is the New England Genealogical Society, and the lower right is the Ontario Genealogical Society, where I was researching my Loyalist family. California History has 7,000 books and periodicals, over 800 historic maps and charts, historic clippings, 1,000 separate archival collections containing 75,000 items. This little library has all of this. Over 30,000 historic photographic images. I wanted to share with you quickly a story of my Monterey family. This is John Willis Green. He came out with a goldfish in 1850. And he went back, was not successful, but he came out again in 1852, and he mined in Nevada City, and he went back with $6,500. This is in one of the books that is not digitized, that is in the California History Room. His grandson, his son-in-law, Daniel Monroe, we talked about him a little bit, went to the University of Michigan. Here he is in this catalog. And notice Arthur Herbert Snow is down below him. That was the man who was a witness at his wedding. We talked about cluster research and how people travel. Our relatives, our ancestors didn't travel alone. They traveled with friends and family. And here he is, Arthur Snow and Mattie Snow. This is a trunk that my grandmother used in California. This family came down the coast to the Isthmus of Panama, crossed the Panama, and came up the coast to San Francisco. And this is San Francisco in 1868. Again, directories placed them in San Francisco in 1868. And there's Daniel Monroe. I know he was there with his family. And again, H.A.H. Snow was right there with him. This was his university friend. The census helped me place them also in San Francisco. Name, age, race, occupation, value of real estate. I know that they had a son, Clarence. They lost a daughter at this time, but Clarence had just been born when the census was taken. And this is the farm that his father-in-law, who came with him, with his family, and settled in Hollister. This is the Gold Rush father-in-law, John Willis Green, and this is his farm. And I know he was in Hollister in 1870 because the census says so. And this is a farm that my great-grandfather managed for Miller and Lux, the Peachtree Ranch, right outside of King City. The digital reel at the Monterey Public Library has indexed the newspapers from 1846 to 1959, and I found several things about my family which helped me place them in time. One is that Daniel Monroe did indeed live in San Lucas in 1888 while he was managing the Peachtree Ranch for Miller and Lux. The vaqueros that worked on the farm, the farmhands, the harvester, my grandfather and great-grandfather, who were raised on that ranch. And my grandfather even went to Colton Hall School when it was a school in the 1890s. I did go over there to look at the records, but they're incomplete. I still haven't proven that he went there, but my mother was convinced that he did. Hollister in 1890s, the school where my teacher, great aunt, taught. And there she is with her teacher friends. And there she is with her classroom in Hollister. In 1906, of course, the fire. My family was there, and they were cooking out on the street. I have letters from the family that talk about the dirty cooking out on the street in a campfire and how Daisy's pretty dishes were broken. And this story I love. This is a story of the registration, the voter registration, which again helped me track the family and where they lived. They lived on Lincoln Way by the Panhandle during the fire and the earthquake in 1906. But in 1911, They all registered to vote because California was ahead of the rest of the country. And in this particular election of 1912, there were 4 parties. Taft was running for re-election. Woodrow Wilson, he was a Republican. Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat. And Theodore Roosevelt was the Bullmoose Party. He was an independent and a progressive. And the final one was Eugene Debs, who was a socialist. Because the women of the Monroe family were registering to vote, we have a sense of who was voting for whom. William Manley, a son-in-law who worked for an elevator company, voted or was registered to vote as a socialist. He probably was a member of a union. And of course, elevator construction was going very well in 1911. This would be after the fire. Daisy Monroe was registered as a Democrat. Annie Pearl was registered as a socialist. She was married to the elevator man. My Aunt Tot was registered as a Democrat. Harriet, another sister, was registered for voting for Theodore Roosevelt. And my great-grandfather was going to vote Republican. And my great-grandmother didn't even bother to register to vote. That might have been just too much for her in 1911. I wondered what that dinner conversation might be like. Here they are, later in life. And then the newspaper told me that Daniel Monroe was stricken with a stroke of paralysis, and he passed away. And his sister-in-law, Mrs. Reynolds, which gives me her married name, left to attend the funeral. This is another story of a power explosion that took place and impacted the story of John Willis Green and his second wife. And that's a whole nother story. He married the mother of this young girl who was a heroine in the explosion. And finally, John W. Green did pass away, and the obituary appeared in the paper. Papers are so helpful. And here's the probate of the property. That's from the court. So research. Start with the questions: who, what, when, where, why. Gather your information. Find your answers. Evaluate your sources. And share your findings. And if you have an opportunity, be sure and visit the places your ancestors lived. I've been to New England, Connecticut, where my Swedish family came, Loyalist family, the Swedes, and Australia, and loved it all. I hope that you too will have an opportunity to visit the homes of your ancestors. Facts get recorded, stories get remembered. And so what's your story? Visit us at the library. We'll help you discover your story. We'll show you how to find information to add to your family story. And we will help you provide an historical context for your ancestors' life. We're at 625 Pacific Street. And while you're there, stop by and see us at the California History Room. We'd love to answer some of your ancestor questions. We welcome you to the Monterey Public Library, and we look forward to seeing you in the near future. And if you live out of town, or if you're not able quite to get to the library, check us out on our website. We've got our public library's website, our California History Room, and you can always email us at the California History Room. And if you're interested in photos and archival materials, please email Dennis Copeland. He's the manager of the Museums, Cultural Arts, and Archives. We look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much, Kathy. So Kathy, now it's time to answer some questions. So I'll read the question and then maybe you can answer it. So the first one is, will the library offer more webinars online?
Well, maybe you can answer that, Inga.
Okay, well, this is our very first one, and we want to see how it goes and how well people like it. And if it's popular, then we would love to do more of them. And I know that Kathy has a lot more to share, and some of our other librarians, or Dennis Copeland even, might do one. So we would like to do more if people are interested.
And there's going to be a survey, right?
Right, so we're going to be sending out a survey. Now, another question is, do I need to make an appointment to visit the California History
Oh,
Room?
that's a very good question. If you have a specific question in mind or a research project, it is a good idea to make an appointment, or at least to email us and let us know what you're interested in, and we will be very happy to put out materials that might be helpful. I'm usually at the California History Room on Fridays from 10 to 2, but I do travel, so it is good to make an appointment with me, and I'm happy to help any of you with your genealogy questions and with your California history questions.
Great. Now, next question. How much does it cost to get a library card to use the databases you mentioned in your talk?
Well, a library card is free to all residents of California. So you simply need to come by, fill out a form, and we will be happy to give you your library card. And you can use all of these databases totally for free. And Heritage Quest you can use at home, and Ancestry at the library. And there are many more databases. So we hope that you'll check out that page on our website.
And now some of the databases that you mentioned are available at the Family History Center, but there's no charge to use.
And there's no charge there, so that's another opportunity.
Great. And one more question. Do you have volunteers in the California History Room? What do they do, and how do I become a volunteer?
Oh, that's exciting. We can always use more volunteers. The volunteers are involved in all kinds of things. They help us with assessing archival materials, putting them together in ways that they can be used by the public. Some of them staff the California History Room and are there to help in some ways, so that there is someone in the room. And there is training. And please email Dennis Copeland. He would be very happy to talk to you and give you some more details about what some of the opportunities are. We're delighted with your question. Thank you.
Well, Kathy, it's just been so inspiring to hear you talk. It always makes me want to rush home and dig out those family records and start my work. So hopefully one of these days I will be able to do that. I wanted to let the audience know that the webinar will be available to view on demand. She covered so much material that you might want to review it and look at those slides again. So it will be available in a few weeks. And then for those of you who did register, we have your emails. So we're going to be sending out a survey in a couple of days. And oh, we had one more question. Does one use the Ancestry site in the California History Room only, or on any computer in the library?
Oh, that's a very good question. Yes, it's on any computer in the library. And in fact, it can be on your own laptop, because if you do bring your own computer to the library, you just hook up to our internet, and you may use it on your own computer as well.
Great. Okay. So thank you all for attending, and thank you so much, Kathy, for sharing this great information.
It was my pleasure.
Okay. Good night.